It's better to be unhappily single than unhappily married. And business partnerships are the same. Like any relationship, if you're not well matched and everything's not kind of honky-dory at the start, it's probably going to unravel down the track.
They don't fully understand what it means to own a business.
This is the number one worst reason to go into a partnership.
Alone you go fast, but together you go far.
You can actually create a bigger pie for everyone to share.
If you got a 50% share of the profit and we make $10,000, you get $5,000. What if we lose $10,000? You owe me $5,000 of your money. Is that what you wanted?
Lots of tradie and service business owners are in partnerships, whether it be with a business partner or with your spouse, life partner, or significant other. And sometimes the partnership goes well, and sometimes it's a nightmare. Tune into today's episode where we dig into the ups and downs of partnerships and the do's and don'ts that will determine whether your partnership succeeds or fails. Well, hi there, I'm Tony Fraser-Jones, host of the Profitable Tradie podcast. My sidekick and co-host Phil Smith here is with me today. How you going, buddy?
Always good, always good. Feeling great?
Yep.
Yeah.
You say that every time we start the podcast.
I do, but you ask me the same question every time.
Okay, so I need to ask a better question.
Yeah, well, ask me something different. Okay. What's my favourite colour?
Okay, what's your favourite colour?
I actually don't know. I've never really thought about that for a while. Probably blue, I guess.
What's your favourite breakfast?
Oh, toast?
Geez, you're boring. Let's not do that again. What are we talking about today?
Mate, we're talking about having a partner in your business. So lots of tradie and service business owners either have a business partnership or have thought about it, or they're actually in the process of thinking about it, whether it's a good move for them at the moment or not. And the partnership, it might be more formal. So, getting into business with a mate or a friend, or it might be that you have your wife, husband, or, significant other involved in the business, or maybe you're thinking of getting them involved. And I think sometimes with that, you might not think you're in a partnership, but technically you are, because if you're married, I suppose you're in a partnership either way, right? Yeah. This is the direction of your life. And I suppose today what we're doing is we're digging into what will make a partnership work, what makes it fail, and how you can get the best out of your business partnership.
Yeah, and it's a big deal. I heard someone say once, it's better to be unhappily single than unhappily married. And business partnerships are the same. They are a big deal. And like lots of relationships, you can get into a business partnership that actually aren't good for you.
Yeah.
And if it's not working well, it's a huge frustration and takes a big toll on you emotionally as well as mentally. And on the other side of the coin, if it goes well, it can be massive upside, a huge blessing, and just the best thing you've done.
Yeah.
But there are some telling signs which will let you know whether it's going to be good or not, and you can. Before you get into a partnership, I guess is the best time to make sure that it's going to work.
100%.
Because a lot of the problems come from at the start. Like any relationship, if you're not well matched and everything's not kind of honky-dory at the start, it's probably going to unravel down the track.
Totally. And I'm sure we've got a story to kick us off, Tone.
Well, I don't like to talk about disasters, but apparently they sell more and get more clicks, so let's do it.
More newsworthy.
That's right. This is a cautionary tale for people getting into partnerships, and we work with this business. Quentin was the business owner. He was very stressed out with his business. He had a growing business. Lots going on. He was really struggling to cope. And he needed support, and he really wanted someone else to share the burden of leadership. And frankly, he was actually concerned about losing his best tradesperson called Simon, who actually did lots of the operations work and did some of the estimating. It was like his go-to person. As the business was growing, Quentin was really struggling, and he just wanted some support and help. And really, I guess he wanted to lock someone in, so they couldn't leave and just leave all the weight to fall on his shoulders.
Yeah, well, he wanted the backup, right?
Yeah, he did. He wanted the backup, and that's fair enough. So, long story short, they agreed to go into a partnership. 25%, Quentin, I guess, effectively sold to Simon. He vendor financed him in, so, Simon didn't have to really put any money down. It was just a pay it off as you go type deal.
Yep, no skin in the game.
No skin in the game. So this worked really well for 3 years. And then Simon and his wife had a couple more kids. And, Simon actually decided that he wanted to have a bit more of a cruisy life. He was getting super stressed out, and he was finding it really challenging. And he actually wanted to work less. And Quentin wanted to work the same or more.
Yeah.
Because the reason that Quentin wanted him in the relationship or the partnership was that he wanted someone else to lift the heavy load as well, to help him lift the load.
That's the thing is Quentin was actually lifting too much load, and Quentin wanted to work less. Not
That's
because
right.
he wanted less than 40 hours, but because he wanted less than 80 hours.
That's right. He wanted just 40 hours. He would have been happy with that, right?
Yeah, right. But the hard part is that for Simon to have less Quinton had to go back to 80 hours, which was defeating the purpose of why
That's right.
Quinton wanted Simon.
And
right?
so they ended up having a pretty tough 6 months because they had a bunch of issues with COVID as well, which impacted cash flow. Profitability sort of dropped away. And here's the thing, Simon actually couldn't fund the repayments from the profits because he was obviously repaying the vendor loan, the vendor finance through the profits. So that just created a real mucky kind of environment. They started to get each other's throats, about who was pulling their weight and where we were going and all that sort of thing. And that took the focus off the business.
Yep.
And it ended up in, a pretty messy divorce.
Yeah.
Not fun. And now the lessons there are probably what happened before they actually got into partnership. So sometimes this doesn't go well, and we need to, make sure that we set it up for success.
100%. And I'm sure that everybody here listening probably, if you haven't been in a similar situation, and hopefully you haven't, but you might have, you probably at least know somebody that has, right? I mean, it's a pretty common story. I mean, you could probably sub out the name Quinton and Simon with basically anyone that you know, and there could be some truth to this story still, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, a few problems if we don't actually do that upstream work, right?
Yeah, well, if you get into a partnership that's a bad partnership or doesn't work, there are definite downsides. And one of them is, as the original owner, you can lose a lot of freedom and flexibility that you had because you've got a bunch of other interests you need to take care of. So that's one thing. Often people aren't pulling their weight. Like, it doesn't feel like people are doing what they're expected to. And, it's difficult enough if you have someone who's an employee who's not pulling their weight. It's way more difficult if you're in a shareholding and you're much more tightly joined together.
You're essentially married, right?
Yeah, in a sense you are.
Yeah, and really, you rely on each other in that way, and you rely on each other to play the role that you've agreed to play in that marriage as such. And the hard part is when someone's not playing that role, then, it creates a lot of animosity.
It does. And what can happen is that life, you go into the partnership with the thought that, well, life's going to be way better. I'm going to have more flexibility and freedom, and business is going to be better, and I'm going to enjoy life more, but life's not better.
That's right.
It might even be worse, except you've got a whole bunch more complications now.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's not fun. And then, if you do need to make a change, unwinding a partnership is way more difficult than just unwinding a business that you own yourself.
Well, it's just like unwinding a marriage, right? It's pretty difficult. There's a lot of things that that are not so cut and dry when you want to break up.
Well, that's right. Actually, it reminds me of a story. Tangent, we do this sometimes. I have a friend who's a doctor. When he was a young house surgeon, he had a senior doctor tell him 3 rules for wealth creation. Number 1, stay married to the first wife. Yep. Number 2, never get remarried. Yep. And if you do, don't have kids with the second wife, because all of that dilutes your wealth. So it's probably similar in a business partnership as well.
Just as a caveat, if you have got remarried and have kids with the second wife, that's fine. It just can create some difficulty, right? And it's not always difficulty, but it is complication.
Yeah.
And so essentially when you go into a business partnership, it's the same thing. It's ideally you want to stay with the same business partner. And we have one of our clients at the moment, recently won Client of the Quarter, won't drop their names, but I really liked one of their things they said, which was that their number one goal in life and business is to stay married, which it's cool because it sounds like that's something to do with their marriage, but actually that's to do with so much more than their marriage, because staying married is going to make everything easier. And just keep them focused on why they're doing what they're doing, which I think is really important.
Well, just back to my story, the guy who was dispensing the advice had done all of those things. Yeah. So he was speaking from first-hand experience.
Nobody's immune to these difficulties, right?
No, that's right.
But look, on the other hand, if we do the upstream work correctly and we go into a partnership for the right reasons and we do this properly, then there are some pretty great upsides as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is probably pretty clear. It's a way to retain key talent and align the interests of your key people with yours for a longer term.
Yeah.
There's the feeling of support and teamwork. It can be a really lonely job being in business.
Totally.
And a business owner. So if there's someone else who's, shouldering the burden with you, that can be really powerful for a lot of people. 2 heads are better than one. You can get a bunch of different points of view and not just your own. So that can really help with decision making and taking the right direction.
Yeah.
Obviously someone to share the leadership load with. And, can get more and quicker growth, and you can actually create a bigger pie for everyone to share. Yep. And I think that's a thing. If you're thinking about getting into a partnership, you might think, well, hey, I'm going to give away, some of my pie, if you like. If you think of your pie as your business, I'm going to give away some of that, which if that's all that's going to happen is probably not ideal. But if you can create a bigger pie and actually the amount of pie you're getting, even though it's not the whole pie, is more pie.
Right. it's a smaller percentage, but it's a larger total amount of pie.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
And everyone knows that pie is good.
Yeah, well, it sort of brings back that old saying, let's alone you go fast, but together you go far. Yep. So as long as you got the right person to go with, you should be able to get further, and that's really the goal. That's why you're getting into a partnership in the first place. So why don't we talk about what a partnership is?
Yeah, well, partnership in this context really is you have a company or a business that you share the ownership interest of. So there's effectively shares in the business. Let's say there's 100 shares and you own a portion of them and someone else or other people own a portion of that. So maybe you own 70% and they own 30% or 60-40 or whatever it is, 50-50, whatever it is, that the ownership of the business is actually split. But also if you're a husband and wife, you may own 100% together, but you're actually working in it together, which is effectively a partnership.
Well, another thing to consider, though, as well, is if you're a husband and wife, you might say, well, I own 100% of the business. I'm the only one that works in it, which is often false because technically your spouse also owns 50%, and then they might say, I don't want anything to do with it. But the reality is that everything that happens in that business is going to largely affect their life. And so, at some point or another, you're going to have to involve them, at least in the direction setting and decision making, even if it's not implementation of what you're actually trying to achieve. And then
you've got that level of working with a spouse or a significant other, and then you've got down to the level where they're actually a key person in the business. You're both working in the business, and that is a different level of partnership as well.
Well, it's all different dynamics. Not to mention then you go into business with a business partner, and let's say it's Jack and John going to business together. The thing is you think it's a two-way partnership. There's a four-way partnership because Jack and John's wives are equally invested in this, aren't they? So the reality is it's a four-way partnership. So each one of these situations is a different dynamic. If Jack is married and John's not, then it's a three-way partnership. And you do have to consider all of these dynamics because each one comes with its own nuances.
We've worked with lots of members who there's two husband and wives in the business, and all four of them work in the business. Yeah, even more complicated.
Yeah, I mean each one is a different situation. Yeah. But all of them are partnerships. Yep. So I think to start with, maybe we'll touch on what are the bad reasons to take on a partner, because we see these all too often.
Yeah, I think this is really critical to get your head around because, as we talked about earlier, the early days of the partnership really set it up for success or failure. And so the reasons you get into the partnership are really critical. And if you're getting into a partnership for a reason that's putting you at a sort of an emotional weakness, or you're under duress in some way, or you're really stressed out and you're not really your best self and making the best decisions, that can set up a problem down the track. And so, the key bad reason is desperation.
Yeah.
Desperation to keep good people. So if you've got a key person and you're scared of them leaving, and the only way you can think of them staying is to get them into a partnership, I reckon that's that can have a potentially very damaging effect on the partnership. Because there are lots of other ways that you can retain good people.
100%.
They don't have to be a partner. We've talked about this a lot, creating a great culture, paying them properly, giving them opportunities to advance, giving them opportunities to grow and develop, helping them feel like they're a real part of the decision-making. All that stuff is a big part of it. And, you're better just to pay them more than everyone else for a start because you've got some leverage then as well.
Yeah, well, this is especially true for the type of businesses we're talking about, trade and service businesses, because if you look at corporate businesses, there's always another step in that proverbial ladder. Whereas with trades businesses, often you can get to a point where that ladder's a lot shorter. You sort of apprentice, tradesman, you might be a long-term journeyman. Maybe you've upgraded to ops manager or the likes, maybe even a GM if the business is big enough. But at some point, the only step upwards is to be an owner. And often that's going to lead to people running out of future and thinking they want to be an owner and either in your business or go start their own business, when the reality is that's not actually what they want. They just want more for their life. But it's that whole get it, want it capacity to do it, right? Like if you need to understand what you're actually getting yourself into, you need to genuinely want that and then have the capacity to do it. And I think next point is that great employees don't always make great owners. Some don't even actually want to be owners. And I think what I'm getting at here is they don't actually get it. So if you think about get it, want it, capacity to do it, they don't fully understand what it means to own a business. And so when they finally learn that, it turns out they didn't actually want that. They just wanted more money, clean boots, a ute to drive around instead of a van, and to not be crawling in people's crawl spaces and under their houses. That's really what they wanted. But you could have all of that without necessarily having to have all the stresses and complications of owning a business.
Yeah.
And you'll have people ask you for things like, oh, I want profit share, or I want to be able to make this or make that. And really what they want is uncapped bonus, because if you got a 50% share of the profit and we make $10,000, you get $5,000. What if we lose $10,000? You owe me $5,000 of your money. Like, is that what you wanted?
Yeah, and that's important because a lot of employees don't have the risk tolerance profile to actually be an owner.
That's right.
Or their partner doesn't, as well.
Yeah.
Getting back to that. So that's important. And sometimes it's way cheaper to actually just pay people better and make their environment better and invest in the team, etc., than giving away a piece of the pie.
Plus, often that's actually what they wanted. If we think about that example I was saying, the person actually just wanted to share in the profit when it's positive. They actually didn't want to take on the risk of when we lose money or when it goes negative or when it gets low. And so really what they want is uncapped bonus. They actually didn't want ownership. They just thought they did.
Yeah.
So
the thing here is locking in the talents and the energy and the attitude of a key employee through a partnership is a legitimate thing. But doing it out of desperation as the first resort is not a great idea. And there are other things you can do. And you're much better to spend the time and effort building bench strength, creating a great culture and environment, being a better leader than actually just using the partnership as the blunt instrument to get what you want.
Totally. And I just want to make the point as well, desperation can show up in a lot of ways. It could be desperation to keep people. Could also be desperation to reduce your hours, such as Quentin, and reduce his stress. It could be desperation to, be able to take on a different skill set from somebody that has that skill set and maybe you don't. But there are lots of reasons you can be desperate, and either way, the desperation is not the reason to take on a partner.
At the bottom of that desperation is fear.
Right.
Fear of it just not working out. I just desperately need this person, and the power balance is in that person's favour. And if you're going into a partnership when you're kind of taking the weak hand and they're taking the strong hand, that's an issue. That's going to create problems later on, I can guarantee.
Yeah, well, you might take on a minority partner, but technically you work for them because they have all the power.
Yeah, they still have the whip hand.
Makes it hard.
Particularly if they haven't put any money in.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Like, a bad reason or a bad idea is to just completely fund someone in without any money. Because they're buying into your business. It should have some value if it's making some profit. And if they're keen, they need to be able to put some money down, some skin in the game somehow. Now, you might fund them to a percent, but they need to have skin in the game. They need to feel some pain if things go wrong, and it needs to hurt a little bit for them to get in, because that means they're taking it seriously.
Yeah, it's so important.
It's so important.
Yeah, and I think, like you said earlier, better to be miserable alone or unhappy single than unhappily married, right?
100%.
100%. And on the other hand, why do we go into a partnership? What are some good
things? There's some great reasons to do it. I think one is succession planning. So if you are maybe in your middle age, not like me.
What's
obviously.
it like up there?
I don't know what. Well, I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there, bro. Not far to go for me.
Hey.
Maybe another 10 years.
Right.
So succession planning, maybe you are a person who's generation ahead. You've got someone coming through, and it's like, well, actually, I can set up my exit strategy by creating the new owner. So that can be a really cool strategy. And also, not only is it good for you, but you can actually give them an opportunity that maybe they wouldn't get somewhere else, or they get to actually buy into a really well-established business. Rather than starting from scratch and all the risk that comes from that. So that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's a retention of key people.
Yep.
We've talked about that. That is a legitimate strategy.
Yeah, and just to make the point, again, if you're retaining people out of desperation, bad. But if you're retaining people because it's an opportunity and it's not a desperate thing, then that's okay. So same outcome, but for a different reason, right?
It's the come from or the reason underneath that's important. I think support and collegiality, friendship, whatever, is important. It can be lonely at the top, and some people really do better with having someone who's sharing the load, and that's a reason that you may want someone who is an owner, who understands that they have skin in the game, who understands the stresses and struggles of it, understands that if you don't make money this year, actually you're going backwards. Yeah. Because the employees don't really feel it. They still get paid. Good employees will understand, but it's just not the same thing.
And I think just quickly on that note, this is another reason why if you currently feel like I own 100% of my business and your husband or wife, significant other, you're looking at it like, well, they're not really involved. This can be another reason why sometimes getting them involved in some capacity or another can be a really beneficial thing, because you're in it together. And that doesn't mean necessarily, hey, I'm going to get my husband, wife, significant other to come and do this low-level job in the business. But just involving them in like what you're doing and discussions about where you're going and just having somebody in your corner can be really, really powerful. So works for the husband-wife.
Yeah, I mean, look,
too.
we as human beings, just because we own a business doesn't, mean you're not a human being. I think sometimes the news media paint us out to be some sort of greedy bastards who, but that's ridiculous. We're just the same as everyone else, and we want support. We
These
want
small business owners, these landlords, God,
So, getting some support. I think, hey, it might be you want to raise some capital, so you have a partner who may not necessarily be working in the business. You have some expansion plans. They have some cash. They can inject some money into the business to help you fund some growth. That's a cool strategy.
Yeah, it's a good reason.
New energy and enthusiasm. Maybe you're an older person. You've got a younger person who's got more drive, more enthusiasm. And there's no doubt as you get older, your motivations change.
Yeah.
Your energy levels are different. You focus on some different stuff. A new person coming in can really provide that push, to reignite sometimes the fire.
Yeah.
That's a pretty decent reason.
Yeah.
Maybe they have some different skills or a different set of contacts.
Yeah.
Maybe they've worked in an area, in a niche or a niche that you're really looking to break into. And maybe they're an expert at solar, for example, and you're an electrical business who wants to get into that, and you're like, we're going to buy the expertise, form a partnership with this person. They've got all these contacts. It opens up this whole new front of work. That's a pretty decent reason as well.
Totally. So I think there are some good reasons we can get into partnerships and some big benefits. So on the other hand, there are big things to look out for. If you're doing this for the right reasons, there are some things that you want to make sure that you are across before you actually press go, right?
Yeah. Look, as we said, I think desperation is a bad reason, and when you're desperate, you don't tend to really look into things the way you should. So due diligence is really important, and that means doing your research, taking some time to make sure that it's a good idea, and you tick all the boxes you need to. It kind of reminds me of a story. Well, it's not really a story, but I've been married for 20 years, love my wife, amazing woman, super grateful for her. But when you've been married for 20 years, and sometimes people listening have been married for longer, you realize that some different stuff is important in a relationship than what you thought when you got married, right?
Yeah, 100%.
There's
I've been married 5 years already.
Yeah, you already figured that out. Yeah. And so, if you ever had to get remarried for some horrible reason, you'd think about it really differently, because you'd probably want to know some different stuff about your potential partner. Things like values, attitudes, way they look at the world are really important, because they inform how you do money, you do kids, all that stuff. Yeah. It's not probably stuff you think about when you just see this hot bird that you're like, well, man, I like the look of her, right? And so it's the same within a partnership. You really got to get into those nitty-gritty things that are important. So might be, what's your end game? Yeah. What's the expectations around how many shares each partner is going to own? What time frame? Are we going to sell the business? Yeah. Or is the new partner going to buy you out? Like, have discussions around that. Get really clear expectations so that people aren't disappointed. Because that's the thing in a partnership. What's the biggest problem in any relationship? It's about expectations, isn't it?
Totally. That's the thing. Unmet expectations are never gonna work out well. So the better you can set those expectations at the start, the more likely they won't be unmet. They'll actually be met and or even exceeded. And that's going to create a better situation. So, I mean, lots of things to go over as well. Like what happens if one of us dies? What happens if one of us wants to leave and the other one doesn't? What happens if we have an impasse in in the direction that we want to take? How will we solve that? Like, these are all questions that you want to be able to go through beforehand.
And you'll create a shareholders agreement in your company, which outlines how you're going to deal with the things that you can foresee happening. But at the bottom of that is you can't figure out everything in advance. Yeah. So fundamentally, you have to know, like, and trust the person. Totally. And so, do you trust them? Have they ever done anything that you thought was a little bit off? If people are honest in small things, they'll be honest in big things. If they're dishonest in small things, you've got to be really watching that.
Well, you got to have open eyes.
Open eyes. Yeah. You want to think about how do they treat their family, and what are their relationships like with other people, because that's going to tell you how it's going to be for you as well. So that stuff's really important.
Because I think a lot of the time people say, look, that's their personal life, it's none of my business. And I'm like, yep, sure. But at the same time, the way they act in their personal life, like, this will eventually come through. They're not two different people. They're one person. And so the fact is like, they're going to be the same person in the end.
Well, across the board. They are two different people. That's probably a problem as well. Like issue. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Me, myself, and Irene.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about working with a partner.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because that's important. So with your life partner, here's the thing that often happens is And let's be honest, the services trades are still quite male dominated, and often it's the bloke who's the tradesperson or the technician. Not always, and it's changing, which is great. But often it's I'll get the wife to help because she's my wife, and maybe she can help in the office and do some of the books and do some stuff. And look, that can work really well, and there can be a real benefit. And if you're listening, you probably experienced this. If it's worked well, there's a real benefit in you both working together on the same thing, and you like each other, so it's fun. But just because they're your wife or husband, however this works, doesn't mean you should rope them in. And you need to think about that. Like, do they actually have the right skills?
Yeah.
Do they have the capacity? And this is a huge problem because if you're both now tied into the business, then you can't get away. You've got to take the laptop to pay the wages, all that sort of thing. Maybe it's like, the wife is often doing the lead role in the children. And if you've got 2 or 3 kids, whatever it is, and your wife's working 15 hours a week in the business, well, that's cool. But actually, if you think about it, they can't work the holidays. Sometimes the kids get sick, so they jump in to do that. Maybe they've got another job they do as well.
Well, even more than that, you might just get to a point where you need someone in that role who's doing 40 hours. And at that point, like, if your significant other can't flex up those hours, well, then you reach a difficult situation where you have to have a conversation about, are you still the person for this? And as much as, honestly, they probably didn't want to be that person in the first place, once they have been, it can also be a difficult conversation to reverse that decision. So it just makes a tough one, right?
Yeah, and you may need to flex up, but even if they are doing 15 hours a week and that kind of works, when you think about all the time that they're not available for holidays, illness, school trips, whatever, they're not actually working 15 hours per week on average. They're working like 9 hours per week on average. And then we wonder why everyone's stressed out, because actually the person, if it's your wife or husband, they don't have time to do the 15 hours a week. And everyone's stressed out, and you're frustrated with them because they're not doing what they said they're doing, and they're frustrated with you because you don't understand how busy they are trying to do everything, and it can create a whole lot of tension that didn't necessarily need to be there. So
100%.
Understanding that is really important.
Yeah, and I think if you're bringing your husband, wife, significant partner in, to work in the office or something like that, or to do one of the roles in the business, that's fine. But I think I would definitely advocate for partners to be involved from a business ownership standpoint, like a governance standpoint, a direction standpoint, a vision standpoint. But they don't always have to be also playing one of the roles in the business. It's a different thing being an owner and playing one of the day-to-day operational roles. So
it is.
It doesn't have to be both, I think, is the key.
And whether your partner is your life partner in the business or it's a business partner, there's a couple of things that are critical. And one is that you have clear roles.
Yeah.
And the second thing is there can only be one boss.
100%.
This is massive. So a big mistake that happens is you got 2 owners and they're like, they're trying to govern by committee.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is, if you've got kids, you'll know what this is like. They go and ask dad if they can do something, and dad says, no. They go and ask mum, and I'm like, oh, okay. And they divide and conquer, or vice versa, whatever it is.
In my house, it's the other way around.
Yeah, sure.
they ask Maya, Maya's like, no. They come to me, I'm like, sure, go ahead. Now I'm in trouble.
Yeah, we love you, brother.
Yeah.
But if there's not one boss, then it creates confusion. So, you need to determine who's the boss, who's the big boss. That doesn't mean they're more important than the other person. It just means they're the boss and they carry the ultimate responsibility. And then clear roles. This is the big problem. And you want to set this up in advance. Who does what? Who's responsible for what? Because otherwise, you got 2 people kind of doing the same thing and it creates an absolute mess in your business. I can guarantee that.
Well, it's also just unmet expectations as well. Because if I think your role is XYZ and you think it's ABC, then I'm pissed off because you're not doing XYZ, and you're pissed off because you're not getting appreciation for doing ABC. And we just end up at each other's throats when we should have just made that clear at the start.
Yeah. So clear roles, one boss, and communication rhythms. So that means you have set times where you talk to each other. It's like your meeting structures in your business, but also you have a set meeting, at least quarterly. We actually sit down and talk about how things are going as shareholders and what your expectations are, and are we meeting the expectations, and has anything changed, and what about the direction of the business? Yeah, that's really critical. And do that off-site. Make it important. Set it aside. Put it in the diary at the start of the year, the 4 times you're going to do it.
Yep.
And it gives you that opportunity to clear the year and talk about where you're heading. So that's massive.
Yeah, big time. And what about transparency? I think this is really important.
Well, money's involved, right?
Yeah.
So that always makes things a bit tricky. and perhaps you've got a senior partner and a junior partner or whatever, and one person is more in control, maybe one's the boss and one's not, it's critical that everyone knows how the financials are going so that everyone can see that and everyone's comfortable that stuff has been done. Now, most likely there's never a problem here. Occasionally there is, but it's the making sure that it's visible and transparent so there can never be any questions about things going right.
Yeah.
So you know where things are going. There's no kind of, you don't want the seeds of distrust.
That's the thing, because if there's not transparency, then people will fill whatever blanks there are. They'll fill them with their own wild thoughts, right? And their wild thoughts may be way off base. They actually might be correct, but they also might be completely wrong. So like, the more there's transparency, the less there's people populating gaps with their own suspicions or worries or anything, because everybody gets paranoid sometimes. And so the more transparency, the less paranoia, and the more everyone's on the same page.
That's huge. So transparency is massive. I think complementary skills as well. So if you're thinking about getting into a partnership, do you have a set of skills that work together? Now, like you and I have a good partnership because I have a certain set of skills.
Yeah, okay, Liam Neeson.
And I'm kind of like quite a creative, lots of ideas person. Some of them are rubbish, but some of them are good. And it's not that you don't have ideas, you have great ideas, but you're better at me than me at actually implementing stuff. So you can take an idea and make it happen. Yeah. And sometimes I look at what you do and I'm like, oh, that's way too simple, Phil. And you're like, no, like you're way too complicated, Tony. I'm like, so that's complementary skills.
Yeah, we need both, right?
You need both. So
if it was one or the other, we'd actually have a lot of difficulty either way.
So let's say in a partnership with someone who are both exceptionally good at the details and the operations of the business, you know, maybe that's not going to work so well as if one of you is really good at the operations and one of you is much more outward focused and more sales orientated and a bit more of an extrovert and go out and connect with a bunch of, you know, business opportunities. That would be a good set of complementary skills.
Yeah, totally.
And I reckon the last one, which I'd love to talk about, and I know this is important, and you're big on this, is values.
Oh, this is huge. Absolutely huge. I mean, if you don't have the same values, or at least it doesn't need to be exactly the same, but there just needs to be really good alignment between the values. And I'm not talking about your company core values. You know, obviously that's something that you should have created as a company, but everybody has personal values, like things that are important to them that really shapes who they are. And again, doesn't have to be the same, but there needs to be a lot of alignment there, because it's just like with your, you know, wife, you know, partner, husband, significant other. You know, if you don't have a lot of alignment between personal values, then actually what that means is you just don't see eye to eye, and you're going to make decisions very differently. You're going to want very different things. You're going to act in very different ways, and it just creates a lot of tension and difficulty, and you start questioning each other's character, which is just a recipe for disaster, where if that alignment's there, you know, you're going to be a lot better off. So
yeah,
super important.
And like examples might be, you know, are you a growth-focused person? Are you a person who's keen on growing?
Yeah.
And if you both are, then you look at opportunities. Maybe you look at pricing some bigger tenders and getting into some bigger jobs, and you're both excited about that because, that's a good opportunity for growth, or taking on some new general contractors and marketing in that area, whatever it is. But if one of you is and one of you is more of a risk-averse kind of stability person, then you're always like, oh, no, I don't think we're ready for that yet, or I'm not quite sure that's the right time for that. And the one who's the growth focus is like, well, when is it the right time? And you've got this big tension.
Well, it's just a gap in expectations again, right? And again, like, you know, look at a perfectionist versus an implementer. You know, somebody who's a super perfectionist is going to be sitting there just like sweating the details and taking ages to take action because they're looking for that perfection. Whereas if somebody's more of an implementer and they're less focused on perfection, they're going to be just trying to get stuff done. Like, you know, 80% there is good enough. Let's just do it. Out the door, better than in the drawer. And the hard part is you get frustrated with each other, because the implementer is like, you're too slow, and the perfectionist is like, you're too foolhardy, and it just makes everything really difficult. So you need to have a good amount of alignment between those values.
Yeah, this is huge. And I think we mentioned this, but if you are going to get into a partnership, it's critical that everyone has skin in the game. So I think, you know, sometimes I've heard people say, I'll just kind of give the shares away from a really weak position because you're desperate. It's a terrible idea, because what people get for free, they don't value.
That's right.
You know, people value what they pay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important. And if someone you're in a partnership with can't come up with any money, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That tells you something about their character and about where they're at in life.
Yeah.
It shows you that they, you know, haven't really thought long term. They're not really a saver. They haven't really invested in any assets. And do you want to be getting into business with someone? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying if your business is, you know, this is the other thing. You definitely got to get it valued before you get into the partnership, so there's an objective value on it.
Yeah.
And if they have no money, that's a problem. But if they can come up with some money, it doesn't have to be all of it necessarily, although that's ideal.
It's ideal, yeah.
But at least they've got skin in the game. It shows that they've got some financial savvy, some financial brain.
It's more than that, Tony, because the thing is like if you've got a situation where you get the business objectively valued, which means it's not, this is fair. This is what it's worth. And then you say, hey, like business partner, I'm willing to sell, say, 30%, but they can't get the money for 30%. Well, maybe they can only get the money to buy 10% right now. Maybe you're willing to sell more later. But if they can't get the money for 30%, then maybe they should just buy what they can afford, because that is the value of the business. And they are going to get the return on that based on the value of the business, so they should be able to get a return. This is an investment for them. And if they then think that investment's not worth it, well, why are they buying it? They don't have to buy it. Like it's the same as anything. It's like if I want to buy a house, but I don't have the money for that house, I got to buy a different house. No one should give me this house just because I want it. And if I'm not willing to pay what it's worth, well, then I don't actually want it. And I think it's the same with your business, and you have to look at it that way, because this is an investment for them. It's not a gift. And if they don't see it that way, then they're not the right person to be in a partnership with.
Yeah, 100%. People pay much more attention to what they've paid for than what they're given.
That's it. Right, well, should we land this plane?
Yeah, it's been fun. So business partnerships, look, they can be heaven or they can be hell. And which way it goes is largely determined by what you do at the time of forming the partnership and by your commitment to working on the relationships between the partners. So take some time to think before you act. And when you get it right, a great partnership can actually be an amazing thing for your business. Thanks heaps for listening. We'll catch you all again next time.
See you later.